Today I've got some more exciting news about the Optimist inks and the explorations that I've been doing. There was a big question as to whether they would work on a gel plate, because typically something that's lacquer based might be at odds with the gel plate to the point of even ruining the gel plate. None of us want to lose an expensive gel plate. But there is an order that you can layer things that allows you to use the Optimist inks on the gel plate, either to create patterns or to do hand coloring, which is what I'm going to show you today. Okay, so let's get started. Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to explore the Optimist colors again. I did a video a week or so ago. If you haven't watched that one, you might want to go back and find it, about using these new lacquer-based colors in ways that the company didn't necessarily intend or really even imagine. And my question was whether the Optimist colors could be used on a gel plate. And they can be, and there's a particular process in order to make sure that they work on the gel plate, and that's what I want to share with you today. So let's get started. First of all, I have a print here of tulips that I printed out on my printer, and I'm showing you this instead of just encouraging you to draw your own design, although you certainly could draw your own design. But this is a tip for those of you who don't feel comfortable drawing. So this is just a line drawing of the tulips. And if you can see, I went in, hopefully you can see that. I went in and I outlined all of the lines using a ballpoint pen. The best ballpoint pen to use for this is one that has kind of a dull, rounded tip and not necessarily a sharp point, because if you use a sharp point, you could cut right through the paper. The point of what you're going to do here, is to press so hard into the paper that you're actually embossing it. And if I didn't have this is a piece of scrap paper that I used twice. If this was just plain on the back, you'd be able to see that raised embossing. So here's how it works. I'm using Amsterdam. I'm going to put just a tiny dab. You don't want to use too much paint, because if you use too much paint, this could very well fail. Hopefully mine won't. Now I'm spreading out the paint with my brayer. I want to work kind of fast because I'm in Texas and the paint dries pretty fast. And I want to get that nice and inked. Take off a little bit of it so it's you can almost see through the plate. There's a glare there, but in any event, you want it to be a really sheer layer of paint. And I'm going to put this down on the plate, and I'm going to smooth over it with my fingers. And I'm going to see if I can kind of feel, there's a lot of touch related to how this works. First of all, I want to make sure I press down kind of hard around the drawing so that I can pick up all the other excess paint. And then I want to go into the areas that I can kind of feel that are between the lines, so that I'm sure to pick up that paint too. I'm going to do that nice and smoothly, and then I'm going to there's a spot I missed. There, I hope you can see the transfer onto the plate. Now, let me grab some baby wipes because I can clean this up with a baby wipe before I go forward. Somebody wrote and asked me what kind of baby wipes to use, because whatever they were using was kind of breaking up on the surface of the plate. And of course, it depends on where you are, but these are flushable baby wipes. And I don't know whether that makes a difference or not, but I don't ever have that problem of them starting to disintegrate when I'm using them to get rid of little splotches on the plate. Now, I want to be careful or I'll lose some of my lines. So I'm going to keep some of that let's call it texture, right? I'm going to keep some of that because in the final print, I don't really think it'll make that much difference. Okay, now this is critical if you're going to work specifically with the Optimist inks, which is basically the whole plan here. I'm going to let this dry, which doesn't take very long. This paint dries really fast. And then once the paint dries, well, darn, I lost some of my line. I'll have to clean that up on the final print. Basically, I don't really mind some of the extra textural stuff on the plate because in a way, that's one of the characteristics of this process that I personally like a lot. It almost looks sometimes as though it's some kind of, I don't know that much, I'm a textile person by trade, but it has a really nice quality that I like in that it's not too clean. Okay, so let that dry for another minute or so, and then I'll show you the step that's really, really important to add before you start doing your coloring. So let's give it a minute to dry. So it's dry enough to proceed. Next up is this matte medium. This is the liquid version of gel medium. And I like the matte medium. You could certainly use a thicker one, but in the experiments I've done, this is the version that I prefer. This is a brand I've never tried. Hopefully it won't fail. Liquitex, Golden, any brand of matte medium that's recognizable brand should work just fine. I'm going to squeeze out a little matte medium on the surface and then spread that out with my brayer. Now what this does is create a transparent layer of the matte medium, which is basically an acrylic product. Anybody who does gel printing knows that the paints we use and a lot of the products that work best on the plate are acrylic, at least the ones that we use for the coloring and the pulling of the print. And now I need to let this dry completely. And when this is completely dry, I'll add one more coat on top of it. So what I'm doing is building up very thin layers of matte medium, two layers of the matte medium. And that will literally seal the gel plate surface so that then I can introduce the Optimist colors, which of course are resin-based. I can introduce those on top of that layer of acrylic gel, and the colors won't run the risk of sinking into the plate or drying on the plate in some way that's permanent that I can't remove that could potentially ruin the plate. So I want to let this matte medium dry, but then I'm going to come back and add one more real sheer layer of the matte medium before I start applying the colors. And one of the reasons that I'm not using the thick gel medium for this particular stage is that in my experience, two thin layers of the matte medium work a little bit better than one thick layer of the gel medium, which is sometimes not completely smooth. So that makes it harder to color when you're using the Optimist inks. So we'll give this a few minutes to dry, and then I'll put on the other layer of matte medium, and then I'll come back and show you how to do the coloring. Okay, I'm back, and now the layers of matte medium have dried. I did apply a second coat, and I brushed it on the same direction that it went on the first time. I don't think you have to alternate or do anything fancy like that, but getting those two layers of very thin matte medium on there is a really great idea before you start to do your coloring. All right, so I'm using my enamel plate here, And I'm going to, remember, shake these up, make sure they're well mixed. Put out a little bit of red. A little bit of red violet. And you can see it doesn't take, whoa. You can see it doesn't take very much. At least I didn't spew it all over the plate. You do want to make sure it's well mixed. So it'll be nice and, you know, these are not thick, but you don't want them to be runny either. So I'm going to put out a little orange. Doesn't take much. And then I don't think I need the magenta, but I am going to put in a little bit of this clear extender, the colorless extender. This is what you would use instead of using water to thin. Like, and the reason you'd thin it would be if you wanted an even sheerer layer of color, which you may or may not want. And when I'm working with these, while the brushes are wet and while the product's wet, I can rinse the brush in water. I don't need to use the solvent that they sell with this. That would be for cleaning brushes where the resin started drying actually on the brush. And I'm going to use a fairly small brush, so it's scaled to the shapes that I'm printing. I'm going to start over here on the, whatever this is, it's my left, your right, I guess. Start painting in the shapes. And the reason I'm starting on that side, of course, is because if I start over here, I'll be putting my hand in wet resin or wet color, actually. I'm just going to paint in, and then I'm going to start getting a little bit fancy and mix in this case the red and the red violet together. I can make it really dense and solid. I don't know whether you can see this. I can also just make it a little bit mottled. And I suppose you could be a little bit loose and painting, we're painting. You could be a little bit looser if you wanted to and apply the color so that it wasn't actually just filling in the lines. But I think that's a design issue that's up to you. I'm going to go back and add a little bit of orange in there. You can mix the colors right on the plate. And as you'll see at the end, get some really beautiful effects from that. Now moving over, I'm going to paint in this flower, tulip. Make that one mainly orange. And remember, when you're doing this, it's actually a version. In there, I lost my line. I'll fix that up when I get the print finished with a little marker. Add a little bit of yellow to that. If I want the surface to be really dense, I can come back and add another layer on top. But one thing I really love about these, frankly, is that the end result, because you know, this is, I may have already said this, it's a form of reverse painting. What that means is that the black lines that I put down first will dominate here. And the color will when the print's pulled, the color will fall behind the lines. So that's why this can be a little bit loose and it can still work. Want a little bit more of the red, straight red violet. So I can add that to. But one thing about these colors that's got me really jazzed is the way they can mix, and you can see they're mixing right here on the plate. And if I wanted to use the clear extender, and see how now I've tinted that, I could mix that into any one of these colors or all of them once they're mixed together. And I can pull that in, and that would make an even sheerer watercolor effect in the final image. So it's a very cool way to use a watercolor-like product without having the bleeding or the running that might occur otherwise. A little more of that red violet over here and blend it in. And then go to this last one. A little bit more blending. As I said earlier, one reason I'm working on a line drawing that's recognizable is because so many people feel like they can't draw. And if you're still working on that aspect of your own creative development, this is a way to start wearing down that belief you have that you can't draw. Or could be a belief that you're working on by learning how to draw or practicing drawing. Someone once said to me that what we really have to do is just get accustomed to how we personally draw. Although, of course, it depends on what kind of work you aspire to doing. Okay, so I've got the flowers. Now I'm going to switch to a really fine-tipped brush to do the stems. Use a little bit of this. This is basil. And I'm also going to put out, let's see, where did it go? I guess this is it. I didn't recognize the name. This one's called Mediterranean Blue. It's kind of a blue-green. So I'm going to get that brush. Brush doesn't need to be too full, especially for really thin lines. And again, I'm going to start up here at the top and just paint in these stems first, and then work down into the rest of the composition so I don't get it all over my hands, frankly, or my wrist or my whatever. You see where I'm headed. Slide this over a little bit. In the sample I did, I worked a little more carefully to stay inside the lines, but to tell you the truth, it didn't really seem to matter all that much. I'm going to pick up some of this yellow over here and use it up to go back into, let's see, where should I start? I guess I'll do this one. So even with the limited colors that I have here, meaning I've got the basil, the Mediterranean blue, and yellow, I can do a lot of color mixing and even a little bit of shading, just because of the nature of the paints. I'll be able to maximize that in the final print, which is nice. And I think what I'm going to do, which I didn't do on the other, a little the blue along there to keep them distinct from each other. I think what I'm going to do is turn the plate around. I've always got a dilemma, right? Maybe I'll just hold off doing the bottom here until I get everything else caught up. Okay, so I'm closing in on it. And I did flip the plate a couple of times in order to make it easier to paint so that I didn't get paint on my hand, or worse, who cares about the paint on your hand? You can get that off, but you don't want to smear up what you've just painted by getting into wet paint that hasn't dried yet. Okay, it's really fun. So that's the basic painting. Let me slide it up so you can see the whole thing. And now I want to let this dry. And these inks dry pretty fast in this environment. So they'll be opaque. You can see they're still shiny right here. And that will turn opaque when all of the paint is dry. When the paint's dry, I'll use another layer of acrylic paint, meaning, you know, the matte medium that went down was acrylic. I'll use acrylic paint to pull this. And what's essentially happening is that the acrylic paint and the matte medium sandwich the Optimist color in between. And that's what allows you to use them on the plate safely. And the end result is a really beautiful watercolor effect that I think you're going to like. So as soon as this dries, we'll use the acrylic paint and pull the print. And before we get away from this while it's drying, let me say that at this point, if you wanted to, you could use stamps or another patterning device to come in and introduce a pattern that would then fall behind the flowers. So for example, I have a little eraser stamp here that isn't carved, it's just a square. And if I wanted to put in a few little blocks of color, I could do that with the Optimist paint or the Optimist inks, just by painting it onto the surface of the stamp and stamping it. Because since this is completely covered with matte medium, I could literally paint the whole surface with the Optimist inks and it would still work and it would still transfer. And there's another video in my future where I'm going to show you how to use stamps and do more elaborate backgrounds. But this time around, I just wanted you to get the basic drill. Okay, let's let it dry and we'll be right back. Okay, my surface is dry. So that means I'm ready to pull the print. And I'm going to use a white, titanium white, in order to do that. I could use a color and I could use regular, the thicker matte medium, not the fluid matte medium like I used the first time around. But I like the idea of the white background, which may pick up a little bit of the debris that's on the surface too. I'm going to put out a pretty good dose here. It's really important when you're pulling a print like this to use a thicker acrylic paint and not a thinner, not a thin medium, and certainly not a full, you know, there are brands that are craft paints, and craft paints are just a little bit too thin and the transfer could fail. And after all that work I put into it, I sure don't want it to fail. So I am going to make it nice and smooth. And I'm printing onto a heavy drawing paper, smooth on both sides. I'm going to do my best to center that. Some people turn it over and put the plate down like a stamp. And in certain cases, it really helps to register that way, but you don't necessarily need to do it that way. And I have a Baron, but it's out of the camera range, out of my hand range, I should say. So I'm not going to get it. Although if I had a Baron, I could certainly use the Baron in order to smooth this and make sure it was making full contact. And if it was a textured paper, I might consider getting the Baron and using that instead. But of course, a textured paper would break up the surface. And right now, this is a pretty straightforward print, and I want to make sure all of it transfers to the paper backing. Now I'm going to put a book on top of that, a heavy book, and I'm going to leave this. And ideally, I'm going to leave this at least 30 minutes, because if I try and pull that paper off too soon, the paper could begin to tear. I could lose parts of the design. The paint might not be dry enough yet. As impatient as we can be, it's really important to weight this with something and leave it there for a while so that you can take advantage of all that effort you put into making it by having a perfect pull at the end. Okay, so we're going to leave this book for a little while, and then we'll come back and finish up the demo. Okay. The book's been sitting here for about an hour, and now it's time for the reveal. I'm going to lift it up from the bottom and work along the edges to make sure that if there's any, sometimes there's thicker paint around the edges, and you want to make sure to loosen that and pull it away before you start pulling the rest of the print. Yay. Okay. By the way, I always put my prints under a couple of heavy cutting mats, although you could also put it under the book again. But there you go. So once again, the Optimist color has been sealed between the white paint, which obviously is now the background, and the two layers of matte medium, which are on top. So there's my print. I'm very pleased with that. And I have another one right here, same image. And I wanted to show it to you. This was actually a laser print that I put on the gel plate, but I used exactly the same process. I put the laser print down first, and then I used black paint to transfer the laser print to the gel plate. I let that dry, and then I coated it with the two layers of matte medium, and then I did the hand coloring. But the difference between this one and the one that I just showed you from start to finish is that in this case, I made the layers of color way more sheer. So that means I added a lot of the colorless extender to the inks while they were in the palette. And you can see that gave me a much sheerer, more watercolor effect is what I want to point out. So you can go for a heavier effect, as I did in the demo that I walked you through, or you can go for this lighter effect. And now that I've done it both ways, I think I personally prefer this lighter touch. But I've got some other ways to embellish these. So I'll be back with more ideas. And for the time being, I hope you'll get excited about trying the Optimist colors on your gel plate. So I hope you'll give this a shot if you're a gel plate fan. And remember to keep the order right. You've got to have a layer of the clear gel medium on the surface before you start doing the coloring. But this is what it can look like, and you can do all kinds of other things in addition to this. It's just a sample. So see what this will do for you. If you liked this video, subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any of the new presentations, because I've got more things lined up with the Optimist inks. And if you're thinking you'd like to buy some Optimist inks, make sure you use the code down below, because it'll give you a discount on your first order.